Electricast.
How many discounts does USAA Auto Insurance offer? Too many to say here. Multi-vehicle discount, safe driver discount, new vehicle discount, storage discount, legacy.
How many discounts will you stack up? Visit USAA.com/auto discounts. Restrictions apply.
As a contractor, I don't pay for materials I don't use. So why would I pay for stuff I don't need in my mobile plan? That's why the new MyBiz plan from Verizon Business is so perfect. Now I can choose exactly what I want, and I only pay for what I need.
Right now, with MyBiz plan, get our best price, as low as $25 a line. Visit Verizon.com/business to get started today. Price per month with 5+ lines. Includes autopay and paper-free billing and special intro offer discounts. Taxes, fees, economic adjustment charge, and terms apply. Offers end June 10th, 2025.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Brain Arcade podcast. I'm your host, Chris Cross. Dopamine and serotonin have become trendy words, but what do they really mean? We talked to Liam today about what they do to your brain and if that means that gaming is actually bad for you.
Let's talk about our topic. Are you ready for Brain Arcade? It's been a while since we recorded, and I'm excited to get back to it. And I think
me too.
So. What's nice about this is we're going to lead with a Liam topic, right? Basically a neuroscience topic. And then I'm going to play more like MC or, sort of sidekick on this one. So our topic for today is dopamine.
Yes.
Which you hear people throw around like, oh, I designed this for a dopamine hit, or it's designed for these sort of casual uses of a reference towards dopamine. But I don't think anybody actually really understands how dopamine plays in the games. So take it away, Liam.
I mean, that's the reality, right? You hear these buzzwords like dopamine or serotonin.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, I'm lacking serotonin today. And it's like, brother. So, right, we're going to talk about dopamine today. And as a caveat, right, dopamine it's one of the hundreds of neurotransmitters where you have hundreds of thousands, you have trillions of brain cells, right? So the goal of this podcast is that you learn a little bit more about how your brain works. And as a result, you can make actionable steps. So dopamine, really what's going on?
So I think before we get into that, what's your dopamine hot take?
My dopamine hot take is video games hijack our happiness meter and they make us depressed. But that's a good thing.
Okay. That sounds super interesting.
So let me explain, and hopefully by the end of the podcast, you don't think I'm like some maniacal lunatic.
Right.
That's not my goal here. So what is dopamine, right? First things first, we need to talk about what this thing actually is. So it's a something called a neurotransmitter, but very simply, it is what is a neurotransmitter? It is a thing in your brain that makes you feel a certain way. So dopamine makes you feel a certain way. A lot of people associate dopamine with happiness, right? That's kind of the default thought. Or like serotonin and dopamine are like, hey, they're happiness molecules, right? If I don't have dopamine and serotonin, I'm sad, right? And that's partially true, right?
Yeah.
In actuality, and they've been doing a ton of studies over the last couple of years on this, dopamine more and more looks like a motivation molecule.
Okay. Like motivation
to do things. So what does that mean, right? Like, why do we do things in life? Typically speaking, it's to create some sort of goal or to get a reward. So for example, getting out of bed, maybe we get out of bed to get a cup of coffee or to use the toilet. The thing that's pushing you into action in a large part is dopamine. And there's other pieces like the stress molecule, like cortisol, you probably heard of, or norepinephrine is another one. But dopamine plays a huge role in that kind of push to continue to go after something to be happier.
Okay.
And I think a good example of this is, have you ever felt like you almost get a high from trying to do something difficult?
Yeah, where you're basically on completion of the task. Like I'm trying to do something difficult, like I'm tracking progress, and whether I make it or not, there's some feedback like, oh, that feels good that I've tried it. But then there's the other one, which is like when I finally, am able to complete that difficult task, then I'm like, oh, I'm super excited. That was really good. I'm, I feel very, very accomplished. I feel like, I persevered. I'm proud of myself. There's now emotional sort of context to it. So in other words, yes, I have felt that feeling.
So I love the way you described, in a lot of ways, the feeling after, right? Which
Uh,
is like, hey, I did the hard thing and I now feel excitement, right? And this is exactly why we talk about dopamine. Because like something we may not know is dopamine is the big thing that's actually pushing you to keep on going while it's hard.
mm,
So even during those times, like if we're thinking about like a chart almost, right? Like even those times when it's like, hey, this kind of sucks, you've got a ton of dopamine pouring into your system just to keep on fighting. So in that context, it's not really the happy molecule anymore, right?
sure. Right.
So why do we even say all this, right? Well, let's talk about technology. How does dopamine play with technology? And the truth is things like your smartphone or video games are basically created to hijack your dopamine system as much as possible. Your goal setting system, your goal reward system. I'll give you an example. You may have heard of when people start using their phones, right? People will talk about like social media notifications, for example, being this every time you get a like on Instagram, right? You're getting a little hit of dopamine, and that's why you keep on going back to it.
Sure.
And that's the truth. Every single time you get this little like kind of social an app like Instagram, right? It's created to give you social validation in a lot of ways with those likes. Every time you get a comment, you're getting this attention towards you, like, wow, someone really cares about me. And on top of this, right, dopamine and our brain in general is a very primal system. I mean, our brains really haven't changed very much in the last like 12,000 years. But even just think like generation to generation, how much our experiences of life have changed. So you have this brain that's 12,000 years old that's now interacting with a smartphone, right?
Right.
Which didn't even exist like 20 years ago. Even like things I'd never even think of. Like dopamine is really connected to sunlight, for example, but our phones emulate sunlight. Therefore, we like looking at phones and screens because they remind us of like being outside in the sun. And that's why
I didn't know that that was part of the feedback loop.
yeah, and like some people like, hey, it's hard to go to sleep when I'm not using when I'm using my phone, right? It's like, oh, I'm having a hard time. There's like chronic widespread insomnia on the planet right now.
Right.
But the reason is just because we're using our phones before bed. I mean, it's a huge part. And then your dopamine to feel more dopamine because we don't like feeling dopamine depleted. And then it's at 2 a.m. and it's hard to fall asleep.
Yeah, I mean, it happens to me all the time. And like, I was always a quiet room sleeper before I got married. I'm like basically dark room, quiet, maybe some white noise, but generally I want to be in like a incubation pod, right? But
Mhm.
my wife is a TV, like the TV has to be going so there's a little bit of noise. And there's something about the light. Like I didn't sleep with a sleep mask before. Now I do because I have to block out, like I'm super sensitive to the light. It makes me want to sort of keep my brain on. And so, it's tough. Like I have to do like a wind down from electronics and then put my sleep mask on and then I can fall asleep. You know what I mean?
I'm the exact same. I basically my wife will watch TV in bed before
Yeah.
sleep. I have my face mask and then I even have this beaded face mask that I put on over the regular face mask because then it'll like kind of concave into my head. So I get no light out of my like silky one.
Oh my God, that's funny. Yeah, I need that. I like the pressure, but it has almost everything to do with like blocking out the light
Mhm.
because the screen light will absolutely keep me active. And it's not about the brightness affecting my eyes. It's a little bit more like the subconscious is reacting and not allowing me to turn my brain off. Because the thing that keeps me from sleeping is actually my brain gets active and I'm already hyperactive in the brain anyway, so getting like having it non sequitur for 3 hours straight is not great for me. Right.
Yeah, I mean I'm the same way. Where basically if I don't do the wind down that you're talking about, I basically don't fall asleep until like 3 a.m.
Well,
It's not
and it's terrible having, now that I'm getting older, having to get up and go to the bathroom in the middle of the night because like it's like I'm rolling a dice on whether or not I can get back to bed. Right.
no, for real. No, for real.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it's like, oh yeah, fine, but then sometimes I'll wake up, go to the bathroom, come back, and I'm like, oh, there's that thing I'm thinking about for tomorrow, right? And
Yeah.
so I like it turns into an exercise of winding down again because like my brain will latch on to stuff. But that's the thing about like also the TV stuff is I can't put new stuff on because my brain will try to imagine or visualize what I'm listening to. And so, if it's something that I'm even remotely interested in, I won't be able to shut off. Whereas like if it's something that I know, then I will, it's easier for me to fall asleep. So anyway, back to dopamine and
Yeah.
games. I definitely know that there is a automatic reaction happening to with phone and screen light, basically.
And look, we're not the first people to be talking about this, right? So what I wanted to do is actually go through. I found a Reddit post of someone who has kind of gone totally on the "I hate gaming," right? Stop gaming,
okay.
please.
Yeah, sure.
Side of things, and then I'd like to break it down with you on the pieces that I think are totally right and the pieces that
Okay.
are wrong. Because ultimately, from the beginning of this podcast, you may be saying to yourself, "These dudes are make games, like, but they're talking about all these difficulties, right?" So turns out we do love games, right? And this is kind of the balance. So this is coming from a subreddit called Stop Gaming. It says video games fucks all caps our dopamine system. Quit while you're ahead.
Okay.
So I'm gonna read this in full and then we can break it down.
Yeah, go for it.
Typing this from my bed on my phone. Let's say video games fuck your reward system in so many gosh darn ways. Witness this in myself and my 10-year-old cousin and many of my friends. When you lose, you're filled with rage and disappointment and the urge to play until you're satisfied. When you win, at first you get big rushes of dopamine. But as time goes on, this effect fades, like alcohol, weed, or drug tolerances. You're going to need more and more of it to get the same high. The same stuff with video games. Winning a match in League isn't enough. You need pentakills, promos to plat or gold or whatever. Our brains are literally hardwired to seek out dopamine and will take the shortest path to it. We keep going back to video games for big rushes and need to spend more and more time and money to get the same high, thus creating disinterest in other things in life. Quality things that actually effing matter. Family, school, friendships, girlfriend, boyfriend. It's crippling, it's real. The old geezers a few years ago who played video games.
Well, he sounds like a stream of consciousness from his bed. So, like, do what you can.
He's basically saying he gets it. The people who say violent video games are bad, they're right. We're slowly leading ourselves down a miserable path. And once we realize it's going to be a shock and may lead to violence. On the side, my cousin is 12 years old. He plays Clash Royale and sometimes punched his mom because she tripped on the Wi-Fi router while vacuuming. He was seething with anger, literally like this red emoji too. This shit's real. I think we should promote video game addiction awareness. Video games are harmful.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is, yeah, what do you think? What initial thoughts?
Well, there's so much to unpack here because there's just a lot to unpack. So like, but I wonder, like, maybe you can help guide me through this, which is like, there's a way that I want to approach this, which is to separate the effect that this person is having from the game. Also from a game design standpoint, I see the video game a different way. It's a conduit for communication for me. But just like any tool, they can be used for, good or bad. And so that you could be, complementary to the person's psyche or very bad. Understanding or making decisions about the content that you're taking in needs to be empowered as well, right? So there's a behavioral thing here.
I completely agree, right? And I appreciate your openness and also kind of like neutrality, right? Around the fact that like games are a tool, really like a communication tool.
So we kind of come back to like one of my core tenets, right? Which is I am responsible as a game designer, not only for the story that I tell, but listening to the player. And so with that in mind, I have to understand that video games are a conversation. Now it might be, a linear conversation where I'm doling out information and I'm waiting to hear their expected feedback to proceed, right? It's like telling a story and somebody says, and you're waiting for it. And then, that's one pattern of video game. But then there are other patterns which are way more freeform, which are, let's say, like a crafting game where I'm like, here's all your toys. The communication that I'm having with the player takes on a different context because I'm doing more like, I've given you a bunch of toys. You can do whatever you want. Show me what you can create. And that's part of the sort of driver of that. And so, people can go make penis rockets in Zelda and shoot them at monsters, or they can make a car, or they, and it's like, it's basically an expression of self for them, and that's fine. I think where we run into, and what this person is talking about, is essentially there's two negatives here. One, they've gotten involved with a game that is affecting them in a way that they're lost in, like, a bad relationship,
Yeah. Yeah.
right, with the game and the game designers. And unfortunately, many games these days are being made that are designed with KPIs and spreadsheets in mind, and so they don't actually care about the user. They just care about monetization and how long you're staying, under the guise of quote unquote providing fun.
Mhm. No, completely right. The less it's actually about the player, and the more it's about, like, how do I, like, kind of hijack this system? You'll get games where you'll have really dissatisfied players like this, right? I like what you said around it really being a relationship, right? It's a relationship, kind of designer to player, and then also like player to product, like the game itself. So going through this, right? He's talking about League of Legends. Right, League of Legends is a game that's notoriously has people who are very, very aggressive on it, who are, rude to each other, sabotaging, and either, misogynistic or racist, or, a lot of these attributes, right?
Sure. Before we go a little bit too, so I'm very familiar with League of Legends. I've been playing for years and years.
Mhm.
There's a different topic here that I want to identify before we sort of move on to just talk about dopamine, but it
Sure.
does relate, in that my theory when the internet first came out, I call it the Great Masquerade. That there is a part of our psyche that is putting a vision of who we are out on into the internet.
Mhm.
And the other part of that is, like, there are generally no consequences for negative behavior, and also positive behavior, right? Like, there's not a built-in feedback loop for a social behavior modification on the internet. And so there's a part of this that isn't League of Legends fault. It's sort of built into the fact that it's a multiplayer online game where people are participating in this masquerade. And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
it's like they take this part of them that is like, I'm the most ultimate gamer in the world and I'm toxic AF, right? And
Yeah.
then
Yeah. Right.
and then you put it into a tool like League of Legends, which is, like, by nature a 10-person game, which gives you 9 people to troll. And some people get a dopamine hit from trolling people, right?
Right.
And so that's a behavioral thing that's built into their concept of their online persona. But then there's the next step of, like, well, the game is competitive. It is really set up to have feedback loops on, success is winning,
Yeah.
trash talk is acceptable, like, and so, like, when you take what's a seemingly anonymous position and put it into a competitive game, the toxicity is almost a feature, not a bug,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
never mind the fact that it's a team sport, so you're dependent upon 4 other people. And so, like, 4 people could be getting in the way of my dopamine hit. And this is where we come back and talk about dopamine addiction, right? Which
Uh-huh.
I thought I would use as a nice, like, look at that transition. Segue back to you.
Yeah, exactly. So look, like, there's a lot of fundamentals here that we can take away, and they're not inherently wrong, right? I think,
Yeah.
though, blaming all of your problems on video games isn't super responsible, frankly. So, like, one example here of something I like that he said is, our brains are literally hardwired to seek out dopamine, and we'll take the shortest path to get it.
Yep.
That's totally true. Like, if you've ever found yourself just, like, munching on chips almost like unconsciously,
Yep.
this is a really nice example of it, where it's like, or maybe it's like you could have the salad or the chips, but, like, the chips taste better in some cases for most people, right? So it's so much easier to, like, it almost, dopamine can almost feel like there's a puppeteer's hand kind of pulling you in a direction. It's so powerful, right?
Uh-huh.
So, and that's, like, literally what addiction is. Like, you can't control that flow. Like, that's just it. Like, very fundamentally. So, our brains are literally hardwired to seek out dopamine and take the shortest path. Yes. Like, that is
Yeah.
just how our system works, and the way it's mainly used in our brain prior outside of video games, and is basically to reproduce and find food, right?
Uh-huh.
So it's like, okay, I'm going to take the shortest path to find food, and, like, put my genes into the next generation. That's how it's supposed to be used. But things like games and video games and drugs use the same
Drugs,
system.
right? Sure.
Yeah.
Drugs,
Um,
booze, food.
Do I think video games is a drug? 0%. No, no, I do not. I think it is when you win, at first you get big rushes of dopamine, but as time goes on, the effect fades. Yeah, kind of. So one of the biggest things about dopamine is novelty. And novelty is like a kind of sciencey word for basically just new stuff. So new stuff generally makes you more excited and more motivated. If you've ever gotten like a new toy, or even like you're starting your first like week of the new semester at school, right? It's like much easier. Like it's almost like time feels like it's a little bit slower because it's like, wow, I'm learning about my new teachers and my classmates, and I'm playing this new game. And then after week 4, if you're anything like me when I was in college, you can barely show up to class because you're like, fuck this. This is same shit, same dude saying basically the same stuff, just a little bit different math. Okay. All right.
Right.
He says here, thus creating disinterest in other things in life, quality things that actually fucking matter. Family, school, relationships, health, BFGF, wealth, hobbies, friends. This is totally subjective, 100%. They did a study many years ago about people playing World of Warcraft, where they were basically dedicating their entire lives to World of Warcraft. And I couldn't tell you which philosopher said it, but basically the message that they had was the extent to which you care about an activity is the extent to which it matters.
Yeah.
Like I was obsessed with World of Warcraft, and my hours were well spent.
Yes.
Maybe somebody else who doesn't play World of Warcraft says, Liam, what are you doing? Why are you playing World of Warcraft all day? And let's say you're playing League for many, many hours every day, and then your friends, like, you're bummed because you're not Plat 2 yet, or you're not Gold 2. And your buddy goes, why are you bummed? It's just League. It's like, are you kidding me? It's not just League. So more and more, you're going to need more and more of the same stuff to get the same high. What I'd like to take from this, and then he also talked about his like little cousin being angry with his mom because of Clash Royale. No. Like, yeah, maybe he was playing Clash and he was upset about it, but is that the reason he hit his mom? What do I want to... So I pulled a lot of things where this guy's like kind of has the essence of how dopamine works. What I really don't agree with is the headline here, which is video games fuck our dopamine system, quote, while you're ahead. This can be anything. This is not just video games.
Sure.
This is yes. When you do something in life where your dopamine system is activated and you're not happy with it, you can write a post like this. Like I could write it about cheese, for example.
Sure.
Cheese fucks our dopamine system. Quit while you're ahead. Typing this on my phone at bed. Let's just say cheese fucks your reward system in so many ways. Witnessing this in myself and all my friends who love cheese.
Yeah.
Right? When you first have cheese, you get these big dopamine hits, but you need to have more and more of this saturated fat as time goes on. Right? Same shit.
Sure. And
Same
now,
shit with pasta sauce.
Right. So, I mean, tell me a little bit more about how that, like, cheese. So let's actually, I think this is hopeful. Let's move over to cheese and talk about dopamine, because I think we could talk about the dopamine system a little bit more as far as like how it actually works, how your body treats it, what the neurochemicals are, etc. Because like there is one difference between cheese and games, and I'll talk about that afterwards.
Well, so I'm curious your thoughts. So like, because it's a nice starting point. Like, what in your headspace? What's the difference between like cheese and video games?
There's the one big thing is the illusion of control, that the video game is under my control and you're not the game designer's control. That illusion actually sets up a space where when the magic trick stops working, you get very angry and you're conflicted because you're not sure if you're angry at yourself or you're angry at the game designer for setting you up for failure. Right. And so, like a lot of times it's the game designer, but sometimes it's like, you get this built-in escalating reward system in games. And cheese is self-driven, right? Where you're like, I like cheese. I'm going to have more cheese. Oh, look, I like different cheese. I'm going to try different cheeses. And the reward structure is not being set up for you like by someone else, unless you engage somebody who's a cheese expert who then says, here's your checklist of cheeses to try, right? So now, like, that's the sort of big initial difference, but you don't need them to experience, pleasurable cheese. You can just sort of find that on your own. Whereas like video games by nature are driven by somebody else as a design. Even if you design it for yourself, there's a role switch going on there, right? Whereas like
Yeah.
literally I can walk up to the cheese aisle in any grocery store, and if I was cheese motivated, I could just work my way through the aisle, right? And you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
you start to get into like becoming a gourmand or a connoisseur of cheese, and now that brings us sort of back to like the reward for eating the cheese has moved
Mhm.
from the physical eating of the cheese to the act of exploring cheese, then to the sort of blogging or writing about your cheese adventures, which then, so it's like the same
Yeah.
topic has now evolved, right? And so sometimes, and here's the other difference in games, sometimes these skills that you build in games that were there originally developed by having dopamine hits actually get stunted in expression. There's nowhere for them to go. Like there's not another level, right?
Mhm.
Like you're like, I am at the pinnacle of Fortnite Battle Royale. I am the top player in the world. What's next? And the system is contained, right? Like
Mhm.
you're like either have to find another game or you have to find something else, right? So anyway, that's just my sort of thoughts
No,
on that
I
as
love
a
that you said that. But then I also heard you say you're actually starting to blog about cheese, right?
right.
And this is a really, really big piece here, right? Because I heard you start with basically control, right? So,
Uh-huh.
so the control is very different between cheese, right, and video games. But then there's also the social aspect. Really, a lot of this boils down, especially with dopamine, to basically control or relationships. Like,
Okay.
do I need control here, or do I need like love, or do I need like support? Right.
Sure.
Actually, on a side note, cheese is a very fun example because I think it if I recall correctly, it creates a byproduct to this. It's like the starting, I don't know, like amino acid or something to serotonin, which is very funny.
Right, right.
Like funnily enough, but so cheese is a particularly good one. But you're right, cheese and video games are very different, right? Because there isn't a structure. Like you need to love cheese so much that you invent the structure for what's next, right? Even if it's something unconscious getting pulled to the surface and it's like, oh my gosh, I'm smelling in front of the pizza shop. I wonder what cheese they're using, right? And then you go to the pizza
Right.
shop, right? But you had to at least get there first, right? Compared to a game which is very set up for these certain types of reward hits. So the extent to which something can be addictive is varied, right? Initially we spoke about how like smartphones or video games are kind of set up, right, to keep you coming back, and you know a big piece of this is about money,
Uh-huh.
right? At the end of the
Uh-huh.
day. So if I buy a smartphone or like an iPhone, right, for however much they are, right, $1,000, the person who's making the designer who's making it is highly incentivized, right, to make it as exciting as possible. So I want to buy the next version. And like you said, there's a lot of video game designers right now who are creating games very focused on the return on money. So they may try to make it as strong of kind of like a dopamine loop as possible. Um,
Mhm.
so you got to be, I mean, it's something to be mindful of, right? If you find yourself like, you have to evaluate, do I care about other things in life, right? Do I care about family, school, relationships, health, BF, GF, wealth, hobby, friends from
Uh-huh.
that Reddit post? Like, it's really up to you. You can feel into that for yourself. If you end up feeling like you're on social media a bunch, we want to transition into how you can actually apply what you've learned in video games to real life, so you can potentially make shifts and in these fields. I really want to emphasize, I don't care. You can play video games 12 hours a day. All good with me. We're not your dads
Right,
telling
right.
telling you that you need to change yourself. But you are talking to game designers, right? So
Sure.
because at the end of the day, right, initially I said video games hijack our happiness meter and they make us depressed. That was a viewpoint of kind of this guy.
Yes.
But that's a good thing, because if you love video games, it's actually really easy to love something else. if you don't want to love video games as much. So video games are awesome. I encourage everyone to play video games. I think they are good. They're happy. It is in many cases a very safe way to have fun, which is so freaking important in a world which can be not so fun. And if you are playing a ton of video games, and for whatever reason you want to shift some of that energy to something else, we can talk about how you can almost make your life like a video game.
Yeah, I think that's a good topic. Oh, we should come back to that at some point, because much like the cheese example, at some point you can start to take charge of how you're interacting with video games and what you're like, basically level up your meta around all video games. So I wanted to come back to a couple things though and explore like, let's talk about the angry Clash Royale player whose mom kicked the router for a second. Actually, this is really about your control point. What's interesting to me, and this is where I think it's very helpful for people to take accountability for their own decisions and actions. And, you know, when you do something automatic and it's unpleasant or pleasant, whatever, it's good to ask sometimes, well, why did I do that? And, you know, what was the mechanism for it, and break it apart? But like, the thing that drives positive or negative perception on control is expectations. Or you're sort of future casted what was going to happen, right? And so unexpected occurrences like losing connection on a critical game of something that you've played 10 million times.
It's about to be Plat 3.
Yeah, exactly. And so basically that expectation gets broken, and then you're upset because you had embraced this short-term future of winning this certain match or something, right? And you kind of have to come back to like, well, it's not the game itself that is fucking you. It's actually your relationship with the game and setting your expectations, and what you're going to get out of that relationship is broken. Like, there's an unspoken contract. It's basically, you need to take charge of consciously attaching to the game in the first place and what you expect to get out of it, as opposed to going in blindly with, I'm going to have unfettered fun forever.
Yes.
Right. And so setting your expectations. And so that makes it a little easier to react to bad stimuli. Like, I lost connection. Now I'm going to go be toxic to my mom. Like, that kid actually is like just raised wrong.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. And so the expectation that their needs are above the needs of the household, which is, one, it should be clean, right, is a poor sort of value system. And so when your value system gets adjusted like that and you didn't even realize it, it's time to sort of take inventory, reevaluate your contract with League of Legends. Like, what is your expectation of what you want to get out of it? What's your goal setting? And then reconnect all of those things back to your life. And if you have to budget your time or set aside like how you do that, because we would all love to, be in a zero gravity chair with a, 70-inch screen mounted to the ceiling and lose 23 hours a day to just like nonstop dopamine, but that's not living. Like, you need to actually connect that back to life, even if it's your livelihood.
Yeah. I mean, you'll end up dying. Like, that's the actual, like, that's the hard truth. So they did a study on basically rats with cocaine, and cocaine has a lot of dopaminergic effects. Dopaminergic, you may just means dopamine-esque, dopamine-like. Basically, if you give a rat water, food, pretty female rats, I guess in this case it's a male rat.
Yep.
And cocaine. And it can basically pick between the three.
Wow, it's a party in the rat cage.
Yeah, they're very much a rat cage party. You give him everything in the world, and literally he will just like snort coke until he dies. Like, does not touch food, does not touch water, does not touch mates, just snorts coke. So in that case, right, if you're that kid, or you're this guy who's raging, and look, I'm a guy who like busted a hole in a wall when I was a kid playing Dota, and I wasn't doing good. It wasn't a close game. I was getting creamed, or it wasn't a real hole, right? But I broke a little bit. So you got to ask yourself if you want to be the rat that misses everything else in life because of the video game, right? And like you said, it's just about the contract, right? Like, okay, so if I'm playing League for 23 hours a day and I'm sleeping for 1,
right, something's wrong.
Do I even feel good? Right, like that's the first question to ask, because typically, if you're actually doing that, you feel like garbage, right? Yeah.
Generally, right? So I'm gonna throw my 2 cents in here because I think, and don't take this the wrong way, but I'm basically like, I'm not even advocating that you live a balanced lifestyle. What I'm saying is that you live an aware lifestyle. If
Yep.
you're headed down the dopamine hole and that's totally okay by you and those around you, have at.
Amen.
I,
Have
and
fun.
so yeah, and so I'm like, as long as you are making a conscious decision towards that, and like, look, I don't want to start spreading this out into basically an addiction conversation. That's a whole different thing,
It's very different.
right? Because that's like when that becomes harmful for other people, then I have to do a full stop and go like,
Exactly.
okay,
Exactly.
now your contract is not just about you. But if it's just about you and it's you playing games and it's a sort of clinical sort of look piece, all I care is that you're making a conscious decision and that you're not going in with like unrealistic expectations of like what you're going to get out of like this game.
Mhm.
But my being who I am in my experience, I have to flip that the other way. Is it's the responsibility of game designers to consciously understand the contract that they are signing with players, not just what the pillars are and how to get, first transaction and repeated transactions. Basically, to take some care in the fact that you are having a relationship with the audience and that you should not be setting them up for dopamine failure, right?
Yeah.
Or
Oh,
even
completely.
or even financial ruin. And so there was a saying that we had, which is like, let the whales be whales, when we talked about monetization, which I think is fine, but unfettered spending in a game can actually be extremely detrimental. Now, hold on. There's one thing here, and I need to earmark this. Is
Sure.
basically part of the reason that design is in this place and the gamers are in this place, etc., is actually the advent of free-to-play games. And so what's happened is removing the initial transaction, which is an opt-in to the contract, has
Mhm.
essentially made the slippery slope of like what your expectations out of a game are sort of like hands off from the game designer. I don't know, try it. If you like it, keep on coming, right? And so it's different than, hey, let me sell you this. And,
Yeah.
there's an initial investment of $50, and then you have like an expectation of a certain amount of like entertainment from this product. You go into these like, free to play games, which are essentially set up to be infinite loops,
Yep.
right? And so you can end up in these really bad places where you are addicted to something that is essentially designed to keep you in the matrix powering the robots. Like you're basically, intended to have these infinite feedback loops, and you should know that before going into it.
Mhm.
Now thankfully most of the audience is extremely skeptical now, but that has changed the whole social structure of how people deal with games, how they treat games, how they approach games. Clash Royale is a free to play game. Like there's this infinite dopamine potential from some of these games, which is, not normal in game design. And so it is a dangerous corner that I think we should talk about, which is like, what are the psychological effects of free to play monetization on a whole generation? Because the way that the younger generation expects to play games and what they expect to get out of it is totally different, but it's also more nuanced.
Completely. I mean, and you can even extend this into, for example, like video based media. For
Yep.
example, we went from like a 1.5 hour movie at a theater for $12.99 to TikTok or
Right.
YouTube or shorts or reels, right? Where now it's in quotes free, right?
Yeah. Right.
And they need to basically keep you on the platform as long as possible. It's interesting. I feel called to share something called the value equation. So this is more of actually like a basically how you evaluate if something's worth your time. So if we think about kind of like a fraction, right? On the top of the fraction, you have the what's your goal? So like what's actually the outcome that you're looking for? And then your perceived likelihood of achievement are on the top.
Hmm.
So perceived likelihood of achievement is a lot of big words, but in essence, is it going to happen? The thing you want, and is it going to happen?
Right.
On the bottom is how long does it take to get that thing, and how much pain do I have to go through, like my effort and sacrifice.
Uh-huh.
So how painful is it, and how long does it take? And let's give some examples, right? So a lot of people spend money on Amazon. Amazon will send me my protein powder
Uh-huh.
overnight for free
Right.
if I use their site. If I buy it from, I don't know, protein seller, it will take 2.5 weeks, and they will charge me $4.99 for shipping.
Right.
So Amazon is quicker, right? My perceived likelihood of achievement. Do I think this is going to happen from Amazon? Well, I've used Amazon a bunch of times, and it's very big. So yeah, I've the perception that it's going to happen. And is there any pain? Well, actually, they already have my credit card in place. I just have to click one button, buy it now, and it'll be at my door tomorrow. Therefore, am I more likely to spend money on proteinseller.com or Amazon?
Right. Or the proteinseller.com shop on Amazon.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Well, so what's interesting about that is like you sort of bring up a larger discussion topic. I think we are approaching a valueless content event horizon where content is perceived by the audience, and now with AI coming, perceived by content makers as valueless. Basically, we can make content, like we can't make content faster than it's being consumed, but there's so much out there that it's being consumed so fast. And when I say value, I'm using a very specific word. I'm not saying that it didn't cost anything to make or it's not costing you to watch. What I'm saying is like the sort of like leftover impression of that content is ephemeral. It's cotton candy. I watched a 2-hour movie. It had a revenge-ish plot with spies and bad guys. And I watched like 6 of them last week. And so the value of that content is not impactful anymore. Whereas like every once in a while, something hits, like John Wick, the first one.
Sure.
The first one hits and you're like, oh my God, don't mess with that guy's dog. Like,
That's right, exactly.
Which is what made that super unique. And so the value of that content is much higher. Whereas like, I don't know, the next 3 movies are very whatevs. And it's not that they were bad. It's just that they didn't approach above a certain impact target, right? And so when I play games, it's kind of the same thing. And this is a little bit about what we were talking about, the dopamine target of like, it's getting harder and harder for me to have a dopamine response to anything in the market because switching cost. So switching cost, right? And this is talking about your pain valuation of like how much work is it to get the reward? And my argument is we were a little happier when we had to spend a little bit more to get the reward, because then we had an expectation of what the reward was going to be, or at least the value of that reward. Now that we're getting it for free, we feel like we can't really bitch about the value that we're getting out of stuff because technically I got it for free, right? And so it's changed the social contract. Anyway, switching cost. Like switching cost is the player's cost to switch from one game to another. So let me give you an example. League of Legends has a extremely high switching cost. Dota also has an extremely high switching cost because you're not just talking about playing another MOBA. And by the way, this is why it's extremely hard to take on those 2 MOBAs. And it's not actually the quality of the game. That's the
not at all.
That's the factor. Yeah. It's actually the social switching cost. So once you get in, as toxic as it is, and you start to build a little bit of a community inside one of these 2 games, you're now talking about when I move to a new game, it doesn't have my old community built into it. It's like changing cities in the same state. It's like if I move to San Diego tomorrow, all of my support structure is gone. It's the same state. Not that much has really changed, right? But the social structure around me hasn't changed. And so the resistance, it's easier for me to move to Maine than to San Diego. So moving from one MOBA to another is actually harder for me to do than moving from, say, like, stop playing League of Legends and going to play Starfield. Like, it's bounds easier because I'm exploring something new. Whereas like the proposition of going to another MOBA is like same but different. And then you're like, well, same but different and lonely. And so that to me is the switching cost of those games, which is extremely high. Now, because of, now let me use the term switching cost back into the example that we were talking about, is we are living in a society, because I'm identifying that content is essentially valueless. What I'm saying is that like from an audience standpoint, the switching cost is approaching 0 for everything, which then has an effect on the apparent value of the thing you're switching from. Because if it cost you nothing to leave and it cost you nothing to get in, then basically, from my perception, I don't care if you put $50 million into that product, the value to me is almost nothing, except for the time invested. And if I've only invested an hour, 30 minutes, 15 minutes just to taste it out, the value is essentially 0. And maybe we close here, or like, I'll let you close, because like what I take away from this is that as a game designer. Number one, I need to have empathy with the audience and understand that I am presenting a clear entertainment proposition to them.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be overt. It can be subtle, right? Or it can be just intrinsic or built into the nature of the product. But the other one is I need to start solving the problems on a larger level of, first, discoverability.
Mm-hmm.
And second, and it's not so much just the switching cost, but it's also the perceived value of my product. How do I make the value of my product appear and actually deliver on high quality without breaking the bank, and also give it a difficult switching cost? Like, I want you to stay. I have a hard time leaving, but I also want to take care that I'm not like, I didn't make an addiction button.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It's very hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's difficult. I mean, it's a balanced tightrope to walk as a
Yeah.
creator of these things, and understanding that you have there are wizarding powers in game design
Yeah.
that
Responsibility.
that require responsibility, right? At least if you are intentional about it, And even I would plead with the younger game generation audience to understand what we're talking about and be very intentional about the psychological effects of their game on the audience.
I thought that was awesome.
Brain Arcade is a Princess Hermit production, produced by Kyrene Kim, music and mixing by Jonathan Ontiveros. The podcast is hosted by me, Chris Cross. You can find me and my other endeavors at coffeeacross.com.
Electricast.